We need to talk about our next thing here. This was a question you brought up that I don't know if I necessarily I didn't. It's not that I didn't comprehend it. I thought it was just at the time I thought it was a man that was upset with calls in his game, and not rightfully so against the Packers. But we brought up the question. You brought up the question of should NFL refs, should they be fined? And it was something I initially put off. I'm like, man, I know he's bitter. He's angry at the refs for the Green Bay game. I totally understand it, but we're going to, do our show, do our thing. But then you said, you put it in the perspective of the fact that these are refs that are professionally paid to do what they do. Tristan, can you please make your best case as to tell me why NFL refs, and maybe just refs in general, should be fined?
Absolutely. They 100% should be either fined, suspended, or disciplined in some other fashion. I don't know how you could do it besides fining or suspending them from games, but it needs to happen. There's zero consistency when it comes to calling games. Zero consistency. One game, they will call every little bit of contact between wide receivers and cornerbacks. The next game, they let them play, and they're as physical as can be, and it's the same ref crew. There's no consistency with the refereeing. As much as I love the NFL and love watching games, I'm not just saying this because I'm mad about the Packers game. There was some bad calls in that game too. But it seems every game I watch, it's either one way or the other. There's no middle ground. There's no consistency on what constitutes a penalty. If you can't fine the refs or if you can't suspend the referees, then I think the very minimum the NFL could do is make all penalties reviewable. And I don't think that's a long shot. I think the XFL did that. Fans loved it. I'm not sure how much longer it would make games take. It would probably go from about 3 hours to 3 hours and 45 minutes. It would take up a lot of TV time if all penalties were reviewable. So I don't think all penalties should be reviewable, but I do think there are penalties that should be reviewable. And one of those, I think, is pass interference. I know they had the rule last year where you could challenge pass interference. I liked the rule for the most part. I didn't think it was a bad rule, but there needs to be something done to hold the referees more accountable, to achieve more consistency in the flags they're throwing. I think the Super Bowl crew was awful. I thought they did a very poor job officiating that game. Not that if they would have made the calls that I think should have went the other way, Kansas City still would have got their asses kicked. Pardon my language, but it's just if a defensive back trips on a route and falls down and accidentally makes contact with the wide receiver, causing him to fall down, not pass interference. That's never been a rule. That never probably will be a rule. It's accidental contact, and they call it tripping, like it was an intentional trip. It's just really BS calls like that. There's no consistency. If I'm Goodell, something's got to be done about it. I don't know if you could fine them, if it would change the way things are called. You could suspend them, but then when you suspend referees, they're just going to be a shortage of referees, and you're probably going to get even worse referees. I don't know if more time needs to be put into their training, but the calls they're calling on the field, in particular pass interference calls, they're getting out of hand, and every single game you watch, it seems like they're either letting them play or they're calling every bit of contact, and it just doesn't make sense to me. There's no consistency, and I don't like to be one of the people that says the NFL is rigged. I've never been one of those people, but the more I watch the games and the way they're called, I disagree less and less with that premise. I still don't think the NFL is rigged, but I do think there's a very strong case to be made that NFL games could be rigged. Every single game in the playoffs this year, those pass interference calls that I'm talking about went Tampa's way almost every single time, whether it was accidental contact or whether it was intentional contact. And I don't know. It's really messed up. I personally feel like there should be an investigation into it, whether or not games are being rigged, because that's nothing that's ever talked about by ownership in the NFL. And I feel like if refs wanted to do it, it'd be really easy because there's nothing being done to prevent it. Yeah, so I just think there needs to be a new level of accountability amongst NFL referees, especially those ones in the backfield, calling those penalties on defensive backs and wide receivers. Fines, suspension, more training, whatever you got to do. It's got to be fixed. It's almost as bad as UFC refereeing. It's something that needs to get reformed because people get screwed in really bad situations, sometimes game-changing situations, and they don't deserve it. You can't even review it, which is bogus. So yeah, something needs to be done. That's my opinion on it.
You make some great points, but I have to kind of come at it from this angle. We are all human. We have human error, and I think I mean, you talk about companies that are trying to get as much precision and stuff out of their products. They account for human error. You count for aerodynamics. You count for companies that are racing companies. You count for all those different companies that account for human error. It's human error. It's in our nature. We're human error. We are, in some way, we will make a mistake, and that is just how it goes. There's ways to cut down on that, though. You can definitely do it, whether it's a training thing, no matter what it is, whether it's practice. There's ways to cut down on human error. But I don't know if it's specifically by necessarily fining referees, suspending them, even suspending them, excuse me. I will say that I have seen far too many games that have been given away by referees. But at the end of the day, Tristan, we both know you can't leave it up to the refs.
You can't.
You
want to win. You got to win.
You got to win. Absolutely. I think that, but on the flip side of that is sometimes there's going to be a point, whether it's bad play or two really good teams going at each other, a game's going to be close, and a call can make or break that game. And I understand that full-heartedly. I've had the pleasure. I was a sports writer in winter. I've been a sports writer for a little while, and I'm even a little bit at the station here. I have the pleasure of watching these refs and a lot of these have to deal with, players, coaches, even parents making a comment. I can promise you that just from an amateurish level, or at least even a high school or college level, a lot of these people do it for the love of the game, do it for the love of the children, and having men, women, whatever it is, they do it a lot. Mainly for that reason, is for the love of the game and all those reasons, and for the people that they serve. It is not easy being a referee. I can promise you that. Now, I don't have any experience, and I'm not sure if you have any experience, but I have never personally reffed a game. But I can tell you this, just from me being on the sideline, being on the court, being there, the amount of hate that refs get, it is a tough industry, but they did sign up for it at the end of the day, especially if you're a professional. If you're a professional referee, there needs to be something. So my question is this: should NFL refs, or should refs in general in the professional, should they be fined because they make a mistake, because of their human nature? Should they be subjected to suspension because of their human nature? Personally, I don't think so. However, if there was, I think a play should be at the very least reviewable. To be seen, flags, that is, penalties should be reviewable, not plays, because they are already reviewable. But the question needs to be raised, in my mind, is, again, are they going to be fined? Are they going to be subjected to these punishments because of their human error? And at the end of the day, I think, at the very least, again, there should be a review process to these penalties, and it should not just be necessarily all on the refs, because when you have to make a split decision on a call, and you got an entire stadium of fans, players, coaches, everybody there barreling down on you, that's a tough call to make. So I think at the end of the day,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to, we have to remember these are humans just like us. They have families. They are humans. They're just like us. The only difference is they're lucky enough to, in a way, ref a professional game and be there. But also they're unlucky enough to have to deal with the repercussions of if they do get a call wrong. So I think at the end of the day, it's a tough question to ask. I think that at the very least, calls should be reviewable upstairs, whether it's holding, whether it's, because and no matter what people say, and plus a lot of people that complain, it's just in our nature. It's in the fans' nature. We're going to blame it on the refs just because, or not blame, we're going to question a call, excuse me. I think that's the question that gets raised that a lot of people bring up. So at the end of the day, I think it comes down to, you have to be able to be fair and look at both sides. I'm sorry. Now go ahead.
No, I agree with you. There's human error. It's hard to be a referee. I umpired children's baseball back at Pier a little bit, and then I also refereed a few basketball games. And it's tough, but I think the key to doing your job well is being consistent. If you're going to call something on one side that you see, you have to call it on the other side. You have to be consistent with your calls. And I'm not trying to pin any loss or any game on the referees right now. Some people would say I'm only saying this because of Green Bay's loss. My friend Scott commented on the Facebook post the Kevin King hold in the NFC Championship game. That was pass interference, and I'm glad it was called. If they didn't call that, then I think there'd be even more outrage. Even though the ball wasn't catchable, but that's a different topic. But it's just they're wildly inconsistent, and finding them, yeah, is probably not the right thing to do. But when you make a mistake at your job, and the NFL even says you were wrong and you made a mistake at your job, there has to be some discipline, right? You have to be held accountable. You can't just say, "Oh, you messed up. You did this wrong. We're not doing anything to you. Keep reffing games. Go ref the Super Bowl." Like, you have to do something. More training, more consistency. I think if it was my choice, make these calls reviewable. I think that's what people deserve. That's what teams deserve. Make some calls reviewable. Not all calls, because then holding calls would become reviewable. And then that would just be a whole nother disaster. There'd be penalty reviews on every single play. But it's crazy. The inconsistency is crazy. And I'm not blaming any single loss on this. The Packers lost. I don't care that they lost. They deserve to lose. Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur choked that game away in the fourth quarter. But it's hard to say, but it's true. The refereeing in the NFL right now is awful. And I know it's hard to be a referee. There's thousands of people watching you. But you can't flip-flop how you're going to call games every single game. You have to be consistent. You can either let them make contact and let them play and only call obvious penalties, which is what they should do. I think some contact should be allowed between wide receivers and defensive backs. But it's those really blatant pass interference, holding calls or tripping or stuff like that they're not calling one game but calling the next game with the same crew, that just leaves me to wonder, I don't know how they're being trained, or it just needs to get better, and refereeing needs to get better.